Hi, I'm John Stevenson. We're going to be looking at Ezra chapters 7 and 8, where we read about Ezra's return to the land. Previously, we looked at Ezra chapters 1 through 6. This was the first return under Zerubbabel. They come back to the land. They begin the work of rebuilding the temple. That begins in notice I put 538. Actually, 539 BC is when Cyrus the Great captures Babylon. But then probably by 530, late 539, early 538, his decree comes forth. It takes them a while to organize and come back to the land. But they begin rebuilding. And then by 516 BC, and we're told the exact date, aligned to the reign of Darius, 516 BC, the temple is completed, which means that the captivity had gone from the destruction of the temple, 586 BC, 70 years later, 516 BC, that's the rebuilding of the temple. Now we're coming to a second return to the land. This time it will be Ezra chapters 7 through 10. But notice in the intervening period, we have the events that took place in the book of Esther are normally thought, and I think that's probably correct, they're normally thought to have taken place between Ezra chapters 1 through 6 and then chapters 7 through 10. But we're not covering that here. We're looking at the book of Ezra. And so in this lecture and the next one, we'll look at that second return and then what it brought about. There's going to be an issue we'll see in the last two chapters of Ezra. And then in the book of Nehemiah, we see another group coming. So we have three different groups, first under Zerubbabel, then under Ezra, and then a third group comes under Nehemiah. And it's in the days of Nehemiah that the walls of Jerusalem will be rebuilt. The dates for that will be 445 to 444 BC. Now, I want to also speak of some variations on the name of Ezra. He's known in our English Bibles as Ezra. The Hebrew, it's actually a shortened form of Azariah, which means the Lord has helped. Or also you might find a Greek rendition of it, especially if you're looking at either the Greek Septuagint or perhaps in the Apocrypha, you'll see first and second Esdras, and that's just another name for Ezra. And in the Apocryphal version, you actually have some other books and also some supposed additions to the story of Ezra. I do not believe those are canonical, and so I don't treat them as part of the Bible. You can take them as either nice stories or maybe some interesting sayings and things like that. Ezra chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. Now, after these things, that's after the events that took place in Ezra chapters 1 through 6, and as I noted, considerably after these things, a few generations have passed, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And notice we had seen, we'd actually had some chronological questions previously when we saw the name Artaxerxes. I didn't note it then, but there's just a slight spelling difference, and you pronounce it essentially the same way, a Samek instead of a Sheen, a Sin, for the Hebrew letters there. But they sound alike, and so is it the same king? Is it a slightly different name for a very different person? And my answer is I don't know. But this is in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia. There went up Ezra, son of Sariah, son of Azariah, son of Hilkiah, son of Shallum, son of Zadok, son of Ahitub, son of Amariah, son of Azariah, son of Meraioth, son of Zechariah, son of Uzai, son of Bukai, son of Abishah, son of Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the chief priest. So notice he's tracing his genealogy. Now, you say, are there any names left out? I don't know. But he's tracing his genealogy all the way back to Aaron, because we're going to find out that this Ezra is a priest. Now, he's going to have another profession as well. We'll see later on he's a scribe. But first of all, it's mentioned that he is a priest, and he's going to be focused on setting up the worship and fixing the worship and bringing about the worship in the temple, which has now been rebuilt. It was actually rebuilt quite a number of years earlier, but that's been completed, and now we're looking at the worship within that newly refurbished temple. We get to verse 6. This Ezra went up from Babylon and he was a scribe. So he's not only a priest, but he's also a scribe, skilled in the law of Moses. So he's not just a scribe, but a theological scribe. Now, a scribe was somebody who could read, and more importantly, who could write. So, and he's able to do both, and that's in a day and age where not everyone can do that. It takes special training, and not just to read, but especially to write. You say, well, why couldn't more people be taught? Remember that writing implements were at a premium. You can go to a local store and pick up a whole ream of paper. I almost always have one or two in my office. But they didn't have paper back then. They had papyri, the Egyptians did. And remember, when you're making papyri, every single sheet has to be handmade. That's going to raise the cost of papyri. Or you could write on animal skin, but that means for 2 sheets of parchment, you have to kill 2 animals. So writing is not something everybody did. And so he's skilled in the law of Moses, which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. And the king granted him all he requested because the hand of the Lord his God was upon him. We're going to see that phrase a few times. The hand of the Lord being upon someone. And so notice he's giving credit not to his expertise in reading and writing, but he's giving credit to the Lord, because the hand of the Lord was upon him. So he is a scribe. Verse 7, now some of the sons of Israel and some of the priests, the Levites and the singers, the gatekeepers and the temple servants, went up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. Notice we're given the exact date relative to the king. And Ezra is accompanied by this entourage. Verse 8, he came to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. Verse 9, we have a more exact specification on the travel arrangements. For on the 1st of the month, he began to go up from Babylon, and on the 1st of the 5th month, he came to Jerusalem. Notice it takes about 5 months for the expedition to get organized and supplied, and then to make the journey. It's not something where you can just walk across the street. They don't have high-speed trains or anything like that. They're walking the whole way. But notice he comes even here in good order. Again, verse 9, because the good hand of his God was upon him. So again, we have a reference to God's grace and God's goodness, because after all, it's not just walking the journey. That can be a very hazardous journey. No matter which route you take, there can be bandits along the way, there can be troubles along the way, there can be drought, there can be famine, and you can't just go into your local convenience store to pick up supplies. You have to take those with you. Verse 10, for Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord, and to practice it, and to teach his statutes and ordinances in Israel. So notice, he is both a priest and a scribe, but he is also, and thirdly, he is a teacher. And I can identify with that. I don't see myself as much of a scribe. I certainly don't see myself as a priest, except maybe in the sense that all believers are priests. But I do see myself as something of a teacher, and I've been gifted by God. I like to think that the hand of the Lord has been upon me, where I've been able to have a ministry of teaching, and that is my ministry. And Ezra has this as well. Now, we have next a decree from the Lord. Now I want to go back and look at all the decrees we've had. We had Ezra chapter 1, we had the decree from Cyrus. That was the decree that gave permission for the Jews to return and rebuild their temple. Next, you'd had chapter 4, verses 11 through 12, where Rehum and Shimshah, remember they were the sort of local governor / tattletales, who reported to the king and gave an evil report that was against the Jews. O king, look at these Jews, they're rebuilding their temple, and the Jews have a bad history of rebellion, and maybe this is one of those rebellions. And then the order had come back from the emperor I take it to be Cambyses, although he's not given that name, in chapter 4, verse 17, where the order is given to halt the temple reconstruction. Then in chapter 5, verses 7 through 17, there is again another report, this time from Titani, who had been I don't know if he was actually the satrap, but the governor of that area on the east side of Mesopotamia, on the what they call beyond the river, but that was on this side, on Israel's side of where the river was, and he had given a report of to the king about how the Jews had resumed the construction without permission, and so he wants to. He doesn't put a stop to it, but he does send this report. In chapter 6, verses 1 through 12, we have the letter that Darius writes, the official letter, where he is giving them permission, the Jewish people permission to resume the work. They're already doing it, but now he is endorsing what they're doing. Now that we saw all five of those in the previous section, chapters 1 through 6. I should add that most of these, from chapter 4 through chapter 6, each one of these, the passage actually switches to Aramaic as it's telling of those letters, indicating, of course, Aramaic was the language. It wasn't the language of the Persians, but it was the language used across that portion of the Persian Empire to communicate, because everybody understood that language. And so each time you have that letter being given, the letter switches. Instead of Hebrew, it switches to a very close related language, but it's Aramaic instead. And now we come to chapter 7. Chapter 7, verses 12 through 13. We have the final letter that we're going to see. Again, it's from the king of Persia. This time we've changed kings. So notice we'd had King Cambyses, we've had Darius, and now we have Artaxerxes. And this time it is Ezra who is given authority to lead a group to Judah. And he is given, evidently he's given this letter as his pass, as his marching orders, as his commission. He will be able to say, if anybody challenges him, no, here are the orders of the king. They are telling me that I have permission from the king of the world. That's what he called himself, the king of Persia. It was almost the entire known world, at least the part that they knew about. And he has permission to go about his business. And so the letter of Artaxerxes, it gives permission for Ezra and his companions to travel. Not only that, it gives him a tax-free status, where they are going to be carrying silver and gold and temple utensils, and without having this letter of tax credit, this letter that endorses him to travel without anyone collecting taxes, all the points along the way would probably want their cut. They would say, oh, you're passing on our road, so you have to give us a toll, and you're staying in our city, so we want a portion. And by the time he gets to the temple, he might be without any silver, any gold, any utensils, because it will have been left along the way as the penalty, the toll that they are charging to use the roads, to use the cities, to just do the traveling through different areas. And so they have this letter from Artaxerxes where none of that will be lost. Next, there are supplies for the journey, and this caravan, it's quite a number of people. They have supplies to take them on their way. And finally, we have authority given to Ezra to appoint magistrates and judges over the Jews. Now, that won't be over non-Jewish areas, but over the Jews, he will be able to appoint those in authority. So he's actually being given considerable authority in this regard. Ezra chapter 7, verse 27, we have Ezra's prayer. I love this. We're going to see the same thing when we get to Nehemiah. We see Nehemiah praying, and Nehemiah almost reads like Nehemiah's personal prayer journal. But notice, blessed be the Lord, the God of our fathers, who has put such a thing as this in the king's heart to adorn the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem, and has extended loving kindness to me before the king and his counselors and before all the king's mighty princes. Thus I was strengthened according to the hand of the Lord my God upon me, and I gathered leading men from Israel to go up with me. Notice how we have switched from the third person speaking about Ezra to Ezra himself doing the speaking. And that's what happens. That's how you can tell these prayer sections. Now we come to chapter 8, and I'm going to just review it very quickly. Chapter 8, verses 1 through 14, is a listing. It starts off, now these are the heads of their fathers' households, and the genealogical enrollment of those who went up with me. Notice Ezra is still speaking, from Babylon in the reign of King Artaxerxes. And then it lists those who came with Ezra. Next, beginning in verse 15, we have the call for the Levites to join. He says, "Now I assembled them at the river that runs to Ahava, where we camped for 3 days. And when I observed the people and the priests, I did not find any Levites there." And so the Levites are called to join. And then in verse 21, then I proclaimed a fast there at the river of Hava, this is still in Mesopotamia, that we might humble ourselves before our God to seek from him a safe journey for us, our little ones, and all our possessions. So that they fast and they pray. Verse 22, "For I was ashamed to request from the king troops and horsemen to protect us from the enemy on the way." It can be dangerous to do that travel. Why hadn't he asked for those? Because we had said to the king, "The hand of our God is favorably disposed to all those who seek him, but his power and his anger are against those who forsake him." So I had told the king, God's going to protect us. And if we had said that God's going to protect us, I really didn't want to ask for soldiers to protect us, because I said God was going to protect us. And I didn't want to give that poor testimony of a lack of faith. And so we went not trusting in swords or shields or soldiers, but we went trusting in the Lord for the journey. And so verse 23, we fasted and sought our God concerning this matter, and he listened to our entreaty. We actually made the journey, and we made it safely. Verse 24, we have offerings, these various collections of money. Verse 24 sets off, "Then I set apart 12 of the leading priests," and we have some of the names of some of those. And verse 22, "And I weighed out to them the silver, the gold, and the utensils, the offering for the house of our God." All of those valuables, both the money, the silver, the various other accoutrements, are entrusted to the priests and the Levites, where each to each one is accounted, and there's a record kept, because remember, Ezra's a scribe, so he can keep the records, a record kept of all of that which is given to whom it is given, because there's going to be an accounting at the end. And then in verse 31, they finally arrived there. Verse 31, when we journeyed from the river Ahava, the 12th of the first month to go to Jerusalem, and the hand of our God was over us. Again, we see that. And he delivered us from the hand of the enemy and the ambushes on the way. And so they finally come to Jerusalem. Verse 32, "Thus we came to Jerusalem and remained there 3 days." I have a friend who likes to say, whenever you see 3 days in the Old Testament, look to see if there's a picture of Jesus there. Maybe there is. It reminds me of the one who died in Jerusalem and then rose again after 3 days. Verse 33, "On the fourth day," and of course after Jesus rose, we have the fourth day, in a sense, has been ever since. But here on the fourth day, the silver and the gold and the utensils were weighed out in the house of our God into the hand of Meremoth, the son of Uriah the priest, and with him one was Eleazar the son of Phinehas, and with them were the Levites, Jozabad the son of Yeshua, and Noadiah the son of Binnui. And so notice the accounting is made. A careful count is made of that which had been entrusted and now which is delivered. Verse 34, "Everything was numbered and weighed, and all the weight was recorded at that time." So there is that special accounting that takes place. Verse 35, "The exiles who had come from the captivity offered burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 lambs, 12 male goats for a sin offering, all as a burnt offering to the Lord." Verse 36, "Then they delivered the king's edicts to the king's satraps and to the governors in the provinces beyond the river, and they supported the people and the house of God." Now, in closing, I want to talk a bit about the accountability that is shown here in this chapter. Some thoughts on accountability. There's obviously a system of checks and balances that was in effect, where a careful counting was made at the beginning of the journey and at the end of the journey, and everything was accounted for, and nothing was lost. There was no stealing. There was no improprieties. Everything was done decently and in order. And I would suggest that churches need that kind of accountability, because there have been too many times when in the Christian church there has not been that sort of thing, where there have been embezzlement of funds and things done inappropriately. And churches need to be transparent about this sort of accountability, with regard to finances, but not just there, also in our leaders. Our leaders need to be held accountable for that which they do. And I think that it's helpful to have a system of church government that works to keep both the people but also the leaders accountable. And that is that everybody answers to someone. And that's something that is appropriate. And of course, individually, we should also be accountable. Is there somebody who has permission to come to you and say, "Hey, don't look down, but there's this thing that might be wrong, or maybe it's not wrong, but it looks wrong in your life." I can remember many years ago going to my senior pastor. He had actually just come on as senior pastor, and I went to him and I said, "Listen, I want to give you permission at any time, whether it's a big thing or a small thing. If you see something that's not quite right, maybe an oversight in my life or something, tell me about it." And he said, "Well, thank you." And then he said, "By the way, look at this thing." Now, it wasn't a sinful thing, but it was something that I needed to hear. Um, I'll just tell you what it is. I have a tendency to be a little too trusting of people. And he pointed that out, and he was correct. And I know that about myself. And we actually worked out a little bit of a plan to make sure that doesn't happen in a bad way. But both individually and with our leaders and in finances, churches need accountability. Next, I want you to see that we are all accountable to God. You see, there's coming a day when each of us will stand before the Lord and will have to give an accounting. You say, "Well, wait a minute. I thought all of our sins were paid for at the cross. I thought that was no longer an issue." That's true. Our sins were accounted at the cross, but also the scriptures teach, Old and New Testament, is uniformly when it teaches that there is still a day of judgment, and we must give an account. You say, "Well, how does that work together with the cross?" You see, well, what happened at the cross, your faith in Christ, is demonstrated by how you live. That is, the evidence for your faith is seen. And remember, James chapter 2 talks about this. How you can see someone's faith by what they do. And so, this is a call to keep yourself accountable. Go back and look how you've been living. Does it reflect your faith in the Lord? And if it doesn't, I'm not saying go work harder. What I am saying is go back to the cross and ask God for real faith, for a life-changing faith. And when you go there, by the way, you'll see me next to you asking the same thing, because it's not something you say, "Lord, Lord, give me faith," and then you walk away. No, you keep on coming back and ever repenting and ever seeking to believe the gospel more and more.